So welcome to the second part of my talk. It's interesting how this format allowed me to take a break as well. Very luxury. Yes, so I will continue with my talk and now focus on my study into the future of summer comfort in Dutch households. So I selected summer comfort because it's an area of emerging resource intensity in the Netherlands. Demand for artificial cooling in northern Western Europe is expected to grow. We have also seen processes of dependence on artificial cooling elsewhere in the world. But it's less is known about the mechanisms at play in the Dutch context. Anticipating has a double meaning of seeing something coming and making decisions in the present that apply this knowledge. In the project, I first asked the question of what is actually coming. What are probable futures of summer comfort in Dutch households? And what role does delegation play in this future? Which tasks are going to be delegated to automated artifacts, and what could be the consequences of this? The setup of the study was based on looking at a co-evolution of practices and technologies and anticipating this into the next 30 to 50 years. No, 10 to 30 years. And I did this through two different studies. So one focused on everyday practices and the other on technological changes. But they were both closely related. But required slightly different data. So in the study of evolution of everyday practices, I conducted 21 in-depth household interviews, as well as did macro trend research. And for the technological changes, I talked to 10 domain experts. In interviews, I had trade fair visits, did internet search, and read the detailed user manuals of cooling, ventilation, shading, and all kinds of other related technologies, such as fridges. All these interviews were transcribed and coded in NVivo, and these results were summarized first per practice, and I will show in a second which practices I focused on, and then clustered into overall conclusions and a stakeholder report that is available online. So the practices that I focused on emerged from the pre-study that I did, which included a visit to Jolandi Strangers in Australia and lots of literature search. And were these 7, so cooking and eating, personal care and clothing, laundry, working at home, entertainment and relaxation, sleeping, and then ventilating, shading and cooling as practices. And I will now briefly go over the results of the study in a very condensed way. So in this table, you see the self-reported data of actual and preferred temperatures in households. So the squares are the actual reported temperatures of how warm it got, and the green blobs are ranges of preferred temperatures by these households. And the line here in the middle is 27 degrees Celsius. And this is the line or the boundary which in a new regulation that was instigated in the Netherlands since this January to prevent overheating in households, sets the boundary for overheating. So overheating is measured as 450 hours of weighted temperature excess above 27 degrees. And this data, although it's of course self-reported, confirms that there is likely to be an increase in demand for artificial cooling in the Netherlands. On the one hand, because of overheating that is already there, and these were particularly city apartments that showed overheating up to 45 degrees Celsius, as well as overheating that is experienced already well below these new norms for overheating in households. And this was true particularly for practices of home working and sleeping. What it also reflects are the limited embodied capabilities to deal with heat that are present among Dutch society. So for example, there is a complex relation to sweat where this mechanism of the body to deal with heat is, well, dominantly regarded very negatively. And for example, ways of dressing are not adjusted to hot weather, especially in the professional realm. Next to potentials of, or strong potential of increasing energy demand for the artificial cooling, the study also revealed a couple of other areas in which we could expect increases in demand. And one of them is in showering. So showering was done more in times of hot weather during heat waves. And this was not mainly done to cool down, but mainly to rinse off sweat, which was considered to be a very negative aspect of the body. And another one is more called food storage, which not only takes more energy, but also produces more heat in the home, and thus increases the need for artificial cooling and the risk of overheating. But the main anticipated increase in energy demand can be expected from increases in artificial cooling. What is also clear is that there are several ways of mitigating or reducing demand for artificial cooling. And two very important aspects of this are the application of outdoor shading and the application of summer night ventilation. So outdoor shading is clear. Summer night ventilation is about using cooler night air to cool the house down while keeping windows closed during the day. But one of the barriers for these two practices to develop is that traditionally and historically, summer and the sun in the Netherlands is seen as a friend. And to keep the sun out and to keep windows closed during the day, summer has to become regarded more as an enemy. And this really requires a cultural shift. And so cooling dependence is, even though artificial cooling is by many people still regarded as something negative, so it also needs a cultural shift to become implemented. Many people don't really see alternatives to installing artificial cooling when their house becomes overheated. And when you see, and for the houses that do have artificial cooling, part of the participants had already artificial cooling in their home, you see that signs of dependence become already clear. So for example, they show a reluctance to go outside because of relative heat. It's the difference between indoor and outdoor temperatures becomes very high. And related to that, a tendency to take the car to go to other places. In addition to that, so the need for competences of shading and summer night ventilation to have to be developed, we see that cooling actually competes with shading and ventilation. So cooling and outdoor shading compete at the level of investment. So both cooling and outdoor shading require considerable investments, especially if this cooling is built-in cooling and not the mobile type of coolings that you see some examples of here in the images. And I won't go deeper into that, but mobile cooling devices are like a disaster when you look at the energy and resource demand. So people really need to choose between buying a cooling device or having outdoor shading, or they don't need to choose, but they often have a limited budget to have improvements, and then cooling easily wins because it's more direct form of cooling down that requires less work. Cooling and summer night ventilation also compete, and that's mainly at the moment of use. So here also in these images you see that these mobile coolers, they need an open window in order to get rid of the hot air. If you have another, like a more fixed air conditioner or even a floor cooling system, then you need to keep your windows closed in order to keep your cool air inside. So there's less incentive to make use of this cooler night air that is actually already there for free. And then finally, what artificial cooling also competes with is a process of acclimatization. So acclimatization is an embodied process of getting used to higher temperatures. And this can happen at the rate of approximately even 1 degree Celsius per day. So this is especially from research done in sports. If people are exposed to heat stress, then their body can adapt to that heat stress over time. And but if they are not exposed to heat stress, as in an artificially cooled environment, this bodily process doesn't work and doesn't start. And it's not only a process that happens within the time of a heat wave, but it has also been found to be a process that happens over time. So over the years, an entire society can get used to higher temperatures. And this is due to bodily changes, but of course also to all these different strategies that I already mentioned, including outdoor shading, ventilation, but also adjusting rhythms, adjusting clothing, adjusting relation with the body. But when you look at the way in which artificial cooling is designed and the scripts that are designed into it, I've included an example here in the slide of a cooling system. And this is a relatively low energy cooling system that makes use of a water source in the earth. And during the summer, it stores heat that it can use again to heat the home in the winter. So in that sense, it's a very energy efficient system. But as you can see here in the description, it keeps the temperatures inside between 20 and 25 degrees. So if you consider temperatures of 35 Celsius or more becoming normal in the Netherlands, then this will imply a huge difference between indoor and outdoor temperatures, which hampers acclimatization and also it locks people inside because they don't get used to these higher outdoor temperatures, or at least it risks doing so. So this is all anticipating these effects. So this is really now early work and work in progress that I'm showing you here. I was working on this table to think about, okay, what are the different tasks relating to these 4 core aspects of summer comfort and keeping comfortable in the home during a heat wave, and who is suitable for doing what in this situation. And I won't go deeper into this table right now, but I think it may be good to bring it up again in the time of the discussion. And of course, you can pause the video to have a closer look at what is in there. So yeah, one of the things that come out here is that lock-in. So to repeat, lock-in is this dependence on unique artificial capabilities. So to provide artificial cooling in the house can reduce people's incentives and skills to develop other practices of keeping cool that require maybe more effort. So delegation to technology does not necessarily improve practices, but it reshapes them to match these artificial capabilities. So the capability of keeping the house cool is something that, air conditioners and floor coolers have, but they don't have the capability to change somebody's ways of dressing, for example. What this also brings up as a question for me is whether delegation to technologies is a powerful tendency. Is it a powerful tendency of humans? Is it a powerful tendency related to neoliberalism? In any case, I see in design and in the companies that I work with and in the way in which we teach our students that there is a large hesitance to design stuff that requires people to put in some kind of effort. So if you would require people to take part in keeping themselves cool, that seems to be a no-go area for designers and for HVAC companies. So that would be really interesting. I will research that further and also to discuss that in our upcoming session. So to close this presentation, I will very briefly touch upon a couple of activities that I have been engaging with students around this aspect of the role of technology and the role of designers in preventing or in causing lock-in situations. So at the moment, I'm working to integrate the results of the summer comfort study into student design projects, but unfortunately, I cannot show the student work on summer comfort yet because it's still ongoing. But I can show some of the tools I use to stimulate students to think critically about their role in society. So one way I do this is by making them questioning the need for more devices. And one of the ways I do this is, for example, through this cartoon of a Netflix watching robot to trigger reflections on what kind of automation we actually need and what are the benefits they bring versus the price that or the costs that they entail. And another example along these lines is the idea of the dark factory, which is a place where the lights can be switched off because the factory has no human employees anymore. But what would it mean to have a dark home? So this again is sort of an extrapolation of automation and introducing the idea that there are boundaries to this, but that these boundaries are not clear. When is there too much delegation? When is there too much automation? There's no clear answer to this. So humans are a necessary part of the smart home. But what is their role in this future smart home? And more concrete, there are projects in which students critically study future everyday life. So this is a master research project by my student Janne de Jong. And Janne studied future visions of home security practices and created scenarios to estimate the daily energy demand of these futures. She then compared them to present-day security practices and found that for an average household, smart security practices involving smart cameras, locks, lights, sensors, and remote access require more than 3 times the energy to run. And in an additional study using a probe, survey, and interviews, she found, ironically, that feelings of security in these future scenarios did not show any indication of change compared to the present situation. Another example is Smart Cup, and this is done in a course where students work with a critical social science paper and then develop a design response to that. And Smart Cup is a study that used a cup equipped with random light behavior to explore people's expectations of smartness. And the idea to focus on expectations of smartness came from the identification in the paper of smart technologies often not living up to their promises. So, for example, energy efficient technologies leading to more energy demand and household appliances leading to more housework. This made the students wonder, what if this development continues and devices reach a point of complete dishonesty? So they set out to explore how the smart narrative, accompanied by a clearly dumb and dishonest artifact, is capable of shaping people's behavior and practices. The small-scale deployment with 5 participants suggested that expectations of smartness can be quite powerful. Even though participants were aware, several were even trained industrial designers, that the cup could not in fact be smart, they still interpreted the random lights as an advice to drink more water and that they'd better follow. So the smart cup, when used, was assumed to know what's best. Participants experienced it as a normative assistive device that even though they weren't sure of how it even functioned, they felt it knew what was best for them. So they followed its projected advice. This suggests that the power of smart devices in influencing people's behavior is even stronger than expected due to smartness that people ascribe to it without understanding it. So I will leave my examples at that. We can look at some of these during the discussion. And just to close, my future steps for this project is, well, to write a paper, and I'm currently working on that, to work with possible futures of summer comfort scenarios. And here are two examples. So this is a shirt that celebrates sweating. And this is a concept for a total smart home solution that sort of regulates everything for the inhabitant to be low resource intensive, but it's meant as a provocative idea. And then even further on, my focus will be on preferable futures of summer comfort designs. So thank you very much for now. And hope to see you at the discussion session on the 21st of June.